here we are looking at chapter 20. We did the bold-faced words in class. However, because of the snow days, we cut out the not bold-faced words. So I'm just going to quickly go over the not bold-faced words here, just to kind of keep up with what's been going on. So this time period we're looking at during the Second Industrial Revolution, also known as the Gilded Age. There's party deadlock. The Republicans, Democrats oftentimes stop each other from passing bills and get into lots of political fights. And there's few independents back then. There's a lot of people place a lot of emphasis on what party they belong to and taking pride in that. And a lot of it, believe it or not, still revolves around the Civil War. There's this tradition of waving the bloody shirt. The Republicans oftentimes engage in this a little bit more, but the Republicans will accuse the Democrats of having started the war. It was the Democrats that seceded. It was the Democrats that fired at Fort Sumter, and it's all their fault, and to rally their base, to rally their party on some political issue of their day after the Civil War here in the late 1800s. So it's kind of what's going on. Today, from stuff I've seen, is that independents are growing today. We have party deadlock still, a lot of people would argue, but independents are growing. People are maybe becoming more disillusioned today by the two parties and becoming more likely to identify as independent. But back then, party identity was a big part of a lot of people in the late 1800s. And back then, the Republican Party tends to be rural and small town, mid-sized town Northerners, and tends to support the tariffs, the taxes on imported goods to protect the American industry. The Democrats tend to be white Southerners, tend to be big city Northerners or immigrants in the North. African Americans tended to support Republicans back then. Unfortunately, though, they couldn't vote in a lot of areas. But you look at the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, created in 1887. A lot of states had started making laws to regulate the railroads, to basically try to make sure they're having fair business practices and so forth. However, you have this famous Wabash case, where Wabash versus the state of Illinois, where this railroad company ends up suing the state of Illinois, basically saying, look, the Constitution is very clear. Only the National Congress can regulate interstate commerce. And railroads are very clearly interstate commerce if it's crossing out of the Illinois state line, so that Illinois can't regulate it. And so then the Supreme Court case undoes a lot of state laws that have been put into place to regulate the railroads. And so Congress, the National Congress, realizes they need to act fast because only they can regulate this interstate commerce. So they create the ICC, and it's still around today doing things, but its first big job was to oversee the railroads, try to prevent corruption, try to prevent collusion. Basically, collusion here is where maybe two railroad companies realize we're the only two railroad companies in this area, and that instead of competing with one another to offer, lower rates, better service, better train cars and things like that, instead of competing, we'll collude. We'll both charge high rates, and we don't have to worry about service as much. And the farmers and people like that might often be worried about collusion because the farmers, for example, have to use the railroads to get their crops to market. And so that's a concern. And this ICC is created by the National Congress to try to cut out collusion, but to regulate these railroads, the interstate commerce. Pendleton Act of 1883. Remember how we talked about, like, in the age of Jackson, you have a lot of the spoils system where, hey, our party won, therefore, the president gets to pick literally thousands of jobs, or at least thousands of jobs today, and we're going to pick people who helped us win and loyal party members and this and that to secure our party and strengthen us up. Well, it's starting to get a bit out of hand And it's also partially in response to Garfield. Unfortunately, President Garfield gets shot by Charles Guiteau, who's this deranged guy, this lawyer who thinks he helped Garfield win by giving a speech or writing some speeches or something like that. And when he's not given a job, he shoots Garfield because he expected patronage. And so they passed the Civil Service Reform Act that basically says a lot of these jobs, you have to show that you have merit. You can't just give it out based on, who helped you get elected. There has to be some type of merit at least involved on some level. McKinley Tariff of 1890. This gets repealed in 1894. Hurts the Republicans big time in 1892. An election that Democrat Grover Cleveland's going to win. But the Republicans trying to protect American industry, they raise tariffs, but they raise them to a very, very high rate with this McKinley Tariff in 1890. And you might say, well, that's good, but it helps protect American jobs and helps grow American businesses and buy American. But the downside is, a lot of the little guys, the poor people, the little farmers out west, they just want to buy cheap stuff. They don't necessarily care where it's made as long as it's cheap and affordable for them. So this ends up hurting Republicans as the cost of goods increases too high, hurting the Republican Party. Now you can see the National Farmers Alliance and Industrial Union. This is the populist movement, the little guys saying, hey, we're going to, try to, band together and change politics for us and get our own politicians elected who help us out and do our bidding. And your textbook points, I only put it in here because the textbook pointed it out. It says their two biggest concerns are railroad rates being too expensive and purchasing power declining. But the textbook points out that during the late 1800s, railroads were actually decreasing their rates and purchasing power of farmers was actually going up too. That doesn't mean they don't have any valid concerns or that those concerns had no merit. But the textbook does point out railroads are actually lowering their rates and their purchasing power of farmers is actually going up at this time. However, there we go. The Aquila demands down in Florida. A lot of these farmers meet, and they have this alliance platform in 1890 that they put forward at Aquila, Florida. And some of these demands are free silver, any silver brought to the U.S. government. The silver government can't say no. For a small fee for the processing of it, they take that silver, they turn it into silver dollars, coins. They give the silver coins back to whoever gave it to them. And that's inflationary. Remember, farmers want inflation because the farmers believe that inflation will help them pay off their debts. Farmers, many of them tend to be heavily indebted. Maybe they went into debt to buy new agricultural machinery, to build the silo, to, maybe buy more land or whatever. And so free silver, inflationary, they think that inflation is going to be good for them. They think inflation is going to help them ease the burden of their debts. Direct election of U.S. senators. This is something that Andrew Jackson had been talking about back in the 1820s. Still isn't a thing yet. The Populist Party is going to kind of push this forward, but the Democratic Party is going to pick that up and run with it. Direct election of U.S. senators. If you're thinking, well, Mr. Morris, direct election of U.S. senators, well, how were they determined before then? Well, your state capital, the state Congress, your state legislature would pick the U.S. senators instead of we the people, we the voters of Michigan would pick it back in these 1800s. Government storage for crops, loans for crops. So they want the government to build storage facilities, and you can store your crops there for free to help the little guys, help the farmers. Loans for crops. Hey, government, I already planted a field of corn and it hasn't been able to be harvested yet, but it's in the ground and money's coming. It's just not ready to be sold yet. And then the government will give you a loan for the money that you have coming as soon as you harvest your crops. That help the little guy. That's kind of the thinking there. The Populist Party forms, the Northern Alliance, the Southern Alliance, the Northern farmers, the Southern farmers get together, and they put forward a unifying support for a candidate. And it's very hard for the Southern Alliance to kind of get behind this because the white Southern identity was just so immersed in being a Democrat back then. And it's hard to give up support for the Democrats in the South with these white farmers. And you think about this, the Democrat Party really dominates white Southern votes for many, many years. And in fact, it's not until the 1990s that some states in the South have their first Republican-controlled state legislature since Reconstruction ended, which officially ends in 1877. But yeah, Mary Elise, she's this person. She's looking out for the farmers. She's an activist, and she says Kansas had better stop raising corn and begin raising hell. Farmers need to be politically active, support the Populist Party, things like that. I can see some of the other notes we did in class outside of the snow day. But McKinley versus William Jennings Bryan. William McKinley, is a Republican. He's going to win 1896 election, this election. He's also going to win re-election in 1900. Unfortunately for him, in 1901, he gets assassinated by Czolgosz, and Theodore Roosevelt becomes president. But McKinley here, the Republican's running against the Democrat William Jennings Bryan. William Jennings Bryan, believe it or not, is first nominated as the Populist Party candidate. Is first nominated by the Populist Party. But he's invited to the Democratic National Convention. And today, we kind of know who's going to be the nominee for each major party before the convention starts in this election process. Back then, it was the convention that often determined it, settled it. And so William Jennings Bryan had already been picked by the Populist Party. But at the Democratic convention, he's invited to give this speech. He gives this famous Cross of Gold speech. And he basically talks about the farmers, being exploited by the gold standard. And he one of the things he mentions is he says that if for some reason all of the cities were wiped out or burned down or destroyed, but the farms were left untouched, that the cities would spring back to life as if by magic, because it's the farms that do the labor, provide the food, provide the lumber and all this and that, provide the sustenance for life of the country. However, if the inverse happened, if the cities were left untouched, unharmed, and the farms were burnt to the ground and destroyed, well, the cities would shrivel up and die. And so he says, why are we bending over backwards for the big cities and the gold standards killing these poor farmers financially? And we need the bimetallism. We need free silver. We need gold and silver, a bimetallic standard. And the Democrats are just amazed by the speech. He gets nominated as both the Democratic Party candidate then and the Populist Party candidate. And this is the end of the Populist Party because A, they have the same candidate, but B, the Democratic Party then adopts a lot of the Populist Party platforms, like the whole direct election of U.S. senators, and at least for this election, the bimetallism, and so forth. But this kind of ends the free silver debate once William Jennings Bryan loses, and nobody really has a strong push for the gold standard after that. Let me know if you have any questions. Have a good day, guys.